For many people, it's easier to say what the problem is than what the goal is. The goal is what you want instead of the problem, in positive terms, so no knots. What are you going to be doing instead? How are you going to be feeling instead? How are you going to be thinking instead? How will your life actually be different? It's not that your life is going to be just the same, only without the problem. The trouble with only being problem focused is that you're focusing on the very thing that you don't want, and what you focus on tends to grow, at least in your awareness. So it's just like the old chestnut of don't think about a pink elephant. You have to think of one before you can not think about one. So the result is you tend to get more of what you don't want. Another reason for focusing on positive solutions rather than getting rid of problems is that when it comes to stress, it's not really possible to get rid of the stress response, nor is it even desirable. Everyone experiences some stress. A much more realistic aim is to focus on recovering from stress. So much better to develop a clear conception of where you're heading, but not necessarily easy. That's why we're going to spend time on it in this part of the module. So, asking the question, what is our goal? Well, at a high level, what we all want is happiness or well-being. But that's rather vague as it is. What does it actually mean to be happy? What are the ingredients of well-being? Well, this question is the subject of positive psychology, or the science of well-being. Of course, it's a huge subject and I can't possibly do it any justice here, but I'm a big fan of positive psychology and I do recommend some of the references for further reading and learning that I give in the additional materials section for this module. But here I just want to draw out two of the major strands of well-being that positive psychology has identified. They are, firstly, positive emotion and pleasure, and secondly, engagement or flow. Well, we've already looked at emotions in part 1 of this module, and we saw that there are at least 4 major experiential components. First, feeling, which is something to do with the body, and I defined it as the perception of bodily changes that are triggered by an emotional stimulus. Second, thoughts and thinking, both content and style of thinking. Third, attention, again both the what of attention and the how of attention, or the style of attention. And then lastly, behaviours, urges. Emotions tend to move us to act in certain ways. So what distinguishes positive emotions from negative? Well, perhaps the first response is to say that positive emotions feel good. But some further thought will show that that's not really adequate. Take anger as an example of a negative emotion. At least it's conventionally thought of as a negative emotion. Well, in a sense, anger can feel perversely pleasurable, especially when it takes the form of righteous indignation. There's energy in it, and it has a sort of seductive power, maybe even an addictive quality. Another answer might be that positive emotions move you to act in ways that are productive and creative. Even this isn't quite perfect because at times anger can be justified and can have even positive consequences or beneficial consequences. So I don't want to say that anger is always a bad thing, but very often it is destructive, both for us and for other people. Especially so when it runs out of control, when we get so caught up in it that we lose ourselves or we lose our self-possession. Positive emotions can be seen as resources in the sense that they're useful things to call on when we're experiencing difficulties. If you can access positive emotion in the face of stress or when you're feeling anxious, it can sort of displace negative emotion much more effectively than directly trying to get rid of it. I want to list a few internal resources which, though they may not be pure emotions, and aren't on Fredrickson's list, certainly have an emotional quality in the sense that they can be felt in the body. A really important one is confidence, or a sense of competence. This is a kind of belief that you're capable of something, a trust in your ability, but it's much more than a belief. It's something that must be felt. It needs to be embodied in your physiology. So you might know on one level, for example, that you're a good candidate for a job, but in a job interview, you need to actually feel it. To the extent that your body is in the physiology of confidence or of competence, then you won't be in the physiology of anxiety. Another resource is enthusiasm, which is related to motivation, determination and commitment. Again, these qualities need to be felt. There's something to do with the body. Autonomy is another, or these related qualities: independence, self-reliance, and freedom. Just a few more emotional resources. The capacity to forgive, including forgiving yourself when things go wrong, as they inevitably do sometimes, is an incredibly valuable resource. Forgiveness is a kind of letting go, and this points to its physical or bodily aspect, which we'll touch on again when we come to working with muscle tension in Module 3. Then courage, and trust and faith in yourself, but also in other people, and even spiritual faith. Arguably, these things are better described as values rather than emotions, but the point here is that they also can be felt. Let's just summarize where we've got to so far. We've talked about the high-level goals of accessing more positive emotion and more flow states. High-level goals are helpful because they frame how we think about where we're going, but they're rather too general and open-ended, not easy to translate into actions. It's also good to have more concrete goals, or SMART goals. SMART meaning specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. But SMART goals, by their nature, are focused on external behaviours, not internal states or internal resources such as calmness and confidence, so we're in danger of missing the point. It's pretty likely that some of the goals on your provisional list are to do with feelings, for example, to feel calm or to feel calm in some particular context. Now, feelings are problematic as goals for various reasons. Firstly, on their own level, they aren't measurable, so it's difficult to say when you've achieved the goal. So feeling goals aren't SMART goals. But on its own, that's hardly a fatal problem. It's not enough to throw out feeling goals. But there are further problems. Secondly, feelings, by their nature, aren't directly controllable. You just can't turn them on and off by strength of will. So you can't just decide to be cool when you're feeling hot, and similarly you can't just decide to feel calm when you're actually feeling agitated or anxious. Feelings are actually rather unpredictable. You can do all the right things and you might or you might not experience the feeling that you want, and even when you do, they can be pretty fleeting, so you can't exactly tick them off your goal list for very long. Not only are feelings not directly controllable, there's a potentially worse problem. The more you chase after feelings, the more you try to grasp hold of them, the more elusive they get. I think this is a key point here, and we'll return to it in the next part of the current module. Even so, I think feelings are too important to ignore. I think we need to think about feelings in a different way, not as goals, but as feedback. What does that mean? Well, in a general sense, if you do the right things, and if you do them well, you'll experience good feelings or pleasurable feelings, and that tells you that you're doing okay. But if you do the wrong things, then it's likely to feel uncomfortable, and that's telling you something's wrong, and you're not going to achieve the results you want. So my point is that we shouldn't directly pursue feelings as outcomes, but equally, we shouldn't lose sight of them. If we do the right things and do them well, feelings will look after themselves. Let me give a metaphor to explain this. Suppose you're a school teacher. Your goal is to impart knowledge and skills to the kids in your class. If you do that well, then by and large the kids will like you. But your goal isn't for the kids to like you. It's nice if they do, but it's not the point of the exercise. If you don't teach very well, then chances are they won't like you, and you'll get a sense of that, and that's your feedback on how well you're doing your job. But if as a teacher you just concern yourself with being liked, well, chances are then that you won't do necessarily the best possible job, and the kids, they might or might not like you anyway. So life is like this. The best sort of goals are doing things, and feelings are your feedback, and you can generally let feelings look after themselves. If you do the right things, you'll be rewarded with good feelings, or at least temporarily. But if we just scratched all the feelings from our goal list, I think we'd be in danger of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. For most of my clients, the thing is not the doing of whatever it is they want to do, whether it's give presentations at work or whatever, it's not feeling bad when they do it. And if I just said, well, don't worry about the feelings, just focus on giving a good presentation, well, that's hardly satisfactory. So I don't think we can just drop feelings from our goal list. Well, one thing that we can do to accommodate feeling goals is to recast them in terms of learning and development. This takes us back to a point raised earlier, which is that one way that goals don't seem to be realistic is that we don't know how to go about them. Or in other words, we don't have the prerequisite skills and resources to achieve them. Well, in that case, your goal becomes to acquire or develop or improve those skills. An example, if you don't know how to feel calm and relaxed, then you need to train yourself. To be clear, learning and development goals aren't really SMART goals because they tend to be open-ended by nature. There's not really an end point at which you can tick the goal off your list because you can always improve further. So learning goals might not be time-bound, and in any case it can be counterproductive to put deadlines on your learning. Let's have a look at some of the more general mind-body skills. These are the skills we're going to be looking at in the rest of the course. First, put quite simply, relaxation. This is something we all need. It's an everyday term, but it's worth just unpacking it a little because relaxation isn't simply a unitary state. We can relax in a physical sense, reducing arousal, tension, agitation, restlessness, just calming down the body. But I also think there's a mental aspect of relaxation too, calming busy or racing thoughts or mental agitation, quietening the mind. Of course, mental agitation is definitely connected to physical or bodily agitation. In most cases, calming the body will help to quieten the mind to a large extent. But I think it's worth making the distinction because very often what we want is a relaxed mind, but also a clear and sharply focused mind. And I think this is very possible. Relaxation doesn't have to be a sort of soporific, zoned out state. It's possible to be very calm in a bodily sense and also in an emotional sense, but in another sense the brain is switched on, clear and alert and in control. This state of relaxed focus is something that we'll be returning to later in the course. The next skill is self-awareness. This is an interesting one because if my experience is anything to go by, it's pretty unlikely that you'll have it on your list at this stage. But self-awareness is actually an important foundation for many of the other skills. Remember what I said back in the course introduction. Our strategy for solving problems is to learn how to shift body physiology into a more favourable state. And we can't really expect to do this unless we are first sensitive to how our physiology is. It's like a central heating system. It needs to detect the current temperature in order to know whether to turn on the boiler or the air conditioner. So you need to be aware of your own responses in terms of bodily changes, but also the thoughts and desires that condition them in order to have any sort of conscious choice or control. To give a more specific example, you might respond to stress by tightening up your muscles. If you don't notice it, you won't be able to do anything to let it go. So self-awareness doesn't sound like much, but it's a really important foundational resource. Another thing we all need is the ability to resist cravings and impulses that conflict with our long-term goals. The obvious example is you want to lose weight, that's your longer-term goal, and cravings arise for chocolates or biscuits or whatever. Well, it'd be nice to be free of cravings, but it's not realistic, at least in the short term. You have to learn to handle them as they arise. Do you know the best way to respond so they don't overwhelm you and instead they just fade away? The point is that's a skill that you can learn and develop. Okay, more skills. Focus and concentration is another resource we all need. It's also affected by stress, and it also can be trained and developed. Next, emotional resilience. This is quite a high-level skill set in itself. Essentially, it means the ability to recover quickly from emotional knockbacks. It entails firstly the ability to let go of negative or destructive emotions that have arisen, and secondly, the ability to access and sustain positive emotions. Again, these are skills. They don't just happen automatically. They can be trained and developed. Lastly, optimal breathing. This is another one that it's likely it's not on your list. But as I've said in the course introduction, it's a core part of the course. Now at this point, it might not be clear how it relates to your working set of goals, so let me summarize it like this. First, optimal breathing is a key part of the conditions for optimal brain function. If you take a moment to go back to your goal list and ask the question, how relevant is optimal brain function to those goals, I think it'll be clearer. Second, breathing is an excellent window on the mind-body connection. That is, breathing both reflects and is reflected in how we think, feel and act. Breathing is affected by stress and also by emotions, and conversely, learning to change your breathing pattern is a way of influencing both the stress response and emotions. So what this means is that optimal breathing is foundational for many of the other higher level skills and resources that are more directly relevant to you, including the ones I've just listed here. Optimal breathing plays a part in relaxation, in resisting cravings and impulses, in focus and concentration, and emotional resilience. So that's why it forms a core part of the course.